BSO at your review include. We're sister homes and we're led by the County of Pure. We implemented successful change management strategy. The BSO team Secure Unit here and we had the opportunity to proactively support the transition of our secure units within our homes into general bed units. At the time the facilities were built, a designated secure unit was created in each home to safely house those who wander. However, over the years, the waiting list for this type of secure bed decreased due to the stigma associated with residing in a designated secure unit. At the same time, the general bed population of our homes increasingly consisted of residents in many different stages of dementia, with the same diagnoses and responsive behaviors as those residing in our secure units. Changing the secure unit to a general unit with enhancement of the safety and security systems for our entire home would allow us the opportunity to better serve our entire resident population and our community needs. The BSO Team Challenge was to provide support from a responsive behavior perspective throughout this really difficult transition. Our primary team challenge was to support the home transition to preventatively manage elopement, wandering, and trespassing incidents. And our initiative was, logically, prompted by the needs of our home, the staff, and the residents.
The initiative summary. The leadership on this project was the Huron View and Huron Lee leadership teams, including management and administrative teams. Sherry Camlin, our home social worker, and the Homes BSO team. We partnered up with the Huron County Alzheimer's Society, and the audience we were reaching was residents, the families, the staff, the volunteers, and all the visitors in our home. The timeline, the planning time took about a month, and the implementation time took approximately 3 months, starting January 30th, 2013 this year, and we unlocked our doors successfully in May 2013. The evaluation in time, we've been evaluating this process since May. And it's a continuous process, and we've been studying the behavioral statistics and process failure and implementing and evaluating new processes. Expected outcome. The BSO team was tasked with strategic and direct assessment of resident risk, creation of individualized care plans, education, utilization of small tests of change with the overall goal to have no increase in responsive behaviors as a result from the significant environmental change. We did not set a goal to decrease responsive behaviors as we knew this change was going to come, and if we could just successfully open the doors and not have an increase, we felt that we were successful. Challenges and solutions. As with any change, resistance can often be met. One of the biggest changes our BSO teams faced during this transition was the fear expressed by the frontline staff. The fear of not knowing the exact location of each new resident due to their larger environment within which to roam due to their newfound freedom. The fear of a resident leaving the building or possibility of a resident-to-resident interaction due to wandering and trespassing. With each BSO trial observation period of unlocking the secure doors, we were able to better prepare staff and provide them with potential situations that could occur when the doors locks were removed and create care strategies to reduce the risk. So our BSO teams actually did trial observation periods where we taped off the locks on the door and just left the doors open, and then we were able to see which residents were going to come in and out of the unit and what sort of situations we were going to be dealing with. We implemented additional LPAS bracelets and yellow wander strips to keep residents safe as well. When the doors were permanently unlocked, everyone was well prepared, making the transition a very smooth one.
As far as the results go, the move away from a segregated secure unit improves resident and family experiences, aligns the home with current community needs, and will improve the financial outcome of the home. And it moves the home to meet current legal and legislative requirements. Residents are truly integrating well with one another. We've been able to keep residents safe as well as staff. Our beds are being filled more efficiently, accommodating those within our community. We're currently gathering data to assess the overall impact on responsive behaviors both during and after the transition.
Great.
I mean, that was an amazing story, huge transformational change, and I loved how you used small cycles of change and gradual change to do this type of system change. It was great and well done. Okay, the next story that we have is Chelsea Park Long-Term Care Residents, the next success story.
For those who don't know us, I'm Hilda Walsh-Clark, I'm the BRPN.
And I'm Jody Bird, I'm the BSO.
Okay, the topic we have chosen is educating and training staff on responsive behaviors. Now, we are a nursing home that has 247 beds. We are a large facility. Our Alzheimer unit has 61 beds. The challenge, what was the problem that needed to be addressed? There were many responsive behaviors on the secure unit. The highest numbers reflected in resisting care. Staff were frustrated with not knowing how to respond to and support the residents. The challenge was to change staff approach to resident care, while at the same time protecting the safety of the residents as well as themselves. What prompted our initiative? Initially, the BSO staff were working on all 4 units. They were redirecting to focus on the secure unit after the stats reflected that over 50% of all of the total incidences were on the secure unit. With us going on all the 4 units, we were finding it really, really overwhelming because we were being called to one unit for maybe about an hour, then to another unit, and it was just absolutely overwhelming. Meetings were held with the entire staff, utilizing the 5 whys process improvement tool. To reach the root of the problem, it was determined that the staff needed a lot of education in client care concept. Initiative summary, leadership. The nursing operations supervisor, lead for the responsive behavior team in the BSO program, and the director of care, resident care, and the responsive behavior team. Partnerships was the responsive behavior team, BSO staff, RPN, and PSW. And the education manager organized the activities. This came out of the work plan that had been developed for the home at the Residents First training workshop. We partnered with our RNAO facilitator, who also provided her input and suggestions.
Initiative summary, audience. In February of 2012, Chelsea Park started providing training in gentle persuasion approaches to all new hires and existing staff. The staff on the secure unit were targeted to receive more focused hands-on education and training. We had been tracking our indicators for approximately 1 year, and we were seeing more behaviors on this unit. At PDSA, we started to track and evaluate our efforts. It remains ongoing. We started by placing announcements of training sessions in the weekly staff newsletter. Emails were sent to the unit to inform of education plans. The minutes of the RD team meetings were circulated to the C and the C on the secure unit to share and post on the unit. We also spoke to staff one-on-one on the unit about the upcoming training to generate interest and commitment. Timeline. It took a month to plan the education initiatives and put everything together, and an additional month to prepare to roll out the initiatives. Once we started the do part of the PDSA, we began to study our results weekly, which we continue to do. Expected outcome? We believe that with the education provided and the constant reinforcement of that education, that we will see the staff relax more in their role and the number of responsive behavioral incidents will decrease. Residents will be more calm, and staff will realize that when they utilize the skills they have been taught and gain confidence in the new approaches, they will be a decrease in their stress and ultimately an improved quality of life for the residents.
Challenges and solution. Challenges. One of the biggest challenges that we faced in the beginning with our initiative was the attendance at the sessions due to the time constrictions and the workloads. The second biggest challenge was obtaining a buy-in from the staff involved. Solutions. With the first challenge, we decided to organize the sessions during the paid work time and made it mandatory for the staff in the unit to attend. Extra staff were scheduled in to assist with this. For the second challenge, the BSO staff and the responsive behavior team members maintain constant reinforcement on the concepts taught on the unit and demonstrate specific approaches on a daily basis. At the moment, coaching. Results and next steps. The results. It was decided that the stats for the secure unit on a weekly basis for 8 weeks, during which time the BSO staff on the unit would teach, reinforce, and demonstrate techniques to all staff. We were able to reduce the number of resisting care incidences from 53 per week to 8 to 12 per week, which demonstrates significant positive outcomes. This initiative continues at the request of the Responsive Behavior Committee. The next steps. Our overall goal is to bring about a more client-centered approach to care. The initiatives used are ongoing with the goal to have all units, staff utilize the initiatives. We have been learning by trial and error to have to make some adjustments, such as starting out smaller. We were planning more initiatives to implement. As part of the Gentle Approach program, we are learning to participate in a music therapy program, which will provide another avenue for the staff to utilize when redirecting residents' behaviors. The staff has started to intervene on their own without prompting from the BSO staff. Some of our residents sit and play cards every night. Some work on various Montessori kits that have been developed, and others are taken for walks in the garden when their behaviors start to escalate. Every day, we learn something new to try. That is what process improvement is all about.
Thank you very much. That was really great. It's nice to see quality improvement, change management, using the education that you have, and really realizing that, really actually using it and making it real. So it's really good to see the outcomes that you've had and the next steps that you'll be taking. So well done. If we can have McCormick Home be presenting next, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's always great to see everybody else's success story. It feels like ours pales a little bit in comparison with some of the other great work going on, but it's all still part of the process. So, our story topic was about implementing case management, because to be honest, at the beginning of the whole BSO project, it was, you could see so many residents' potential for need, not necessarily those with the outward responsive behaviors, but those with the internal. So it was sort of how can we effectively reach everybody. So just as I said, the challenge is how to best capture residents' responsive behavioral needs. And sort of from experience in long-term care over the years, what I've always found and what prompted the initiative is that in case management, taking a proactive approach can be more effective than receiving a referral after an event occurs. Ideally, you have early screening and reviews completed and interventions in place ahead of time before a crisis event happens, because a crisis never occurs out of the blue. There's always something that happens up to that point, and it's finding out what is happening before it happens to keep it from happening. So our initiative summary is that our team uses a near-to-the-ground approach. Rather than waiting for a formal referral to be generated, of course, we do accept referrals, and we do get them. Our team reviews 24-hour report for any behavior trends that are occurring. There might be a resident who's needing more PRNs to try to manage their behavior, so what's going on with that particular person that perhaps the staff, the frontline staff, haven't had a chance to look back at. We do a pieces review on any new residents who may be at risk. Just an example, a resident who is stable, but may be followed by an external team such as the discharge liaison team for regional mental health. We try to look at the RIDE MDS outcome scales for depression and aggression scores to identify those who are at risk. And we do use a tracking sheet to maintain a list of current residents being followed by the team and what support they require. So our expected outcome is that the goal of using this approach is to be able to early identify and manage emerging responsive behaviors. Feel that this is a benefit for both the affected residents as well as staff, peers, and families. This may also help to effectively optimize the resources in the community, that if we don't have to refer out people to the behavior resource team externally, that we can manage people internally, and that behaviors are hopefully identified and limited before reaching a point where a resident escalates to an event where they may cause injury to themselves, another resident, and or staff. So the challenges and solutions is that the challenges are there are many residents with a wide array of mental health needs who could be seen and given one-to-one support by the BSO team, especially residents with increased depression rating scores. So some of the solutions to that is that we are assisting life enrichment and engaging residents in specific programming to not have them socially isolated and be part of a group. And just as the second point indicates, to gather together small groups of residents to engage in socialization and hopefully improve their depression rating scores on their next RIDE assessment. So results and next steps. Although residents' needs can change unexpectedly, a resident might develop a delirium, suggestions are given to staff to minimize any crisis events from occurring with early detection and review, or to flag issues not managed with non-pharmaceutical interventions for physician med review. And our next steps is, and especially learning about the priming, care planning, is the ongoing creation and personalization of resident-specific behavioral care planning to have the triggers and interventions identified.
Thank you, Debbie. I think that was a very interesting approach, a proactive approach in terms of how we can look at implementing the BSO role within the home. And great. It's very informative, and I'm sure there's lots of follow-up questions with that. It was excellent. The next part of our day, we're going to have a caregiver and hear a story from this individual, and we're going to have our enhanced psychogeriatric resource consultant from Huron County, Sandra Harding, introduce our next speaker.
Hi, it's my great pleasure to introduce you Pauline Thompson today. Pauline is a nurse, and she came to Canada in 1969 with 4 other nurses. After arriving shortly after, she met her now husband, who proposed after 2 months. She got married in 1970 in the UK because she didn't want to be married in Canada. Pauline and her husband Walter had 2 children, Andrew and Amy. Amy took after her mother and became a registered nurse, where she works at the health unit in Clinton. Pauline has lived in Clinton since 2005. She has 3 grandchildren, a grandson 18 living in Burlington, and 2 granddaughters who live in Clinton. Her hobbies include gardening, attending church at the Anglican Church in Clinton. She's also a volunteer for the Alzheimer's Society and at Huron View Long-Term Care Facility. Pauline is a member of the Huron Perth Cooperative, and please join me in welcoming Pauline.
story dealing with dementia. I believe it all started in 204, 205 approximately. Amy, our daughter, Wally and I went to the UK for her graduation. On the return journey, Wally developed a severe headache which lasted 2 or 3 days. After a visit to the family doctor, a CT scan was arranged. Some small abnormalities detected, and Wally was prescribed Lipitor and low-dose aspirin. Nothing else was detected, and we resumed our lives as normal. We both decided to retire at 60. He from a full-time sales manager position, I from a part-time nursing position. The house was put up for sale and was sold. In the meantime, we started to build our house, our dream home, in Clinton. In the interim, we had to rent an apartment. This was when small indications began that Wally was having trouble forgetting keys, access to the apartment, or to the attached garage. The move to the house went well, but in hindsight, it was just the wrong time. We were moving to a completely new area, not knowing anyone, only our daughter and her family. Having no hobbies and finishing work, which he loved, made an impact on Wally. He blamed the move to his state of mind with the move, and me as well. We found a family doctor who, due to Wally's history, decided to refer him to the Aging Brain Clinic at Parkwood Hospital. Various tests showed that Wally was to be diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease. At first, life appeared fairly normal, the occasional mood swings. Wally was still able to drive at this point. He was entered into some drug clinical trials at Parkwood. These continued until his scores began to drop below the accepted range. We quite enjoyed the trips to London, and I was sorry when they were discontinued. As the dementia progressed, the Alzheimer's Society became involved. Wally started to attend their support groups. It became evident that more social activity would be beneficial. So Wally started to attend the adult day program at OneCare once a week. He thought that this was something that he didn't need at the time, but this gradually became 3 days a week. We both benefited by this time away from each other. Soon after our move, Wally joined the hiking group, Tuesdays and Fridays. He really looked forward to this, as walking was always a form of relaxation for him. We also fostered special care need dogs from the Lions Foundation in Oakville. We had done this for years in the past. Wally became known in the town walking the dogs. He also started delivering flyers, but he was paid for that, so that he quite enjoyed that. During this time, it was noticeable that Wally's speech was beginning to be affected. I tended to finish sentences when he became stuck for words. He also had difficulty writing. More subtle changes began. Taps not turned off, losing keys, not dressing himself, putting 3 socks on 1 foot, buttons done up wrong, etc. He would occasionally lash out, never to the extent of injuring anyone, but disturbing all the same. The first major incident occurred one morning. He got up early, took the dog for a walk, and came back, and just took off. He didn't tell me, and we think that in his mind he was going to work. He drove to Toronto to meet with one of his old customers. Found out later they had moved, so he didn't meet up with anyone. We notified the police and a local radio station. He was missing for about 15 hours. He was eventually found and taken to the nearest emergency department, seen and discharged into the care of Amy and myself. A recommendation was sent to the Minister of Transport that Wally should not drive, so his license was revoked. Taking away this independence he so revered started the escalation of frustration, blame and anger, which at times was hard to manage. The next incident occurred at home. One day, out of the blue, he became so angry, pacing up and down, shouting. I became scared, so I left the house. I phoned the family and the police. They arrived with the emergency services. The police calmed him down quite quickly, and Wally was transported to Clinton Hospital. After a day there, he was transferred to Seaforth Hospital under the care of our family doctor. The doctor thought I needed some respite, so kept Wally under observation for a few days. More physical changes began, more problems dressing. Came home one day, he lost a sandal. We retraced his steps and eventually found it. These incidents, of course, sparked anger and frustration. I think partly Wally realized how he was losing control. About 3 years ago, incontinence became a problem. We dealt with it, and much to my surprise, it didn't become too much of an issue. Whether Wally had become resigned to the deterioration, I don't know, as it was difficult to know exactly what he was thinking. Respite was becoming important. With the help of social services, respite time was worked out to be 1.5 weeks every 2 to 3 months. This gave me the opportunity to re-energize myself. My next worry came when I realized Wally may not always be able to find his way home. I registered him with the Safely Home program. It came in handy one day when a kind person noticed Wally looking disorientated. Helped him to Clinton emerge. They then could find a contact number on his bracelet to call me to collect him. One more incident occurred when Wally decided he had to go somewhere. I followed discreetly in the car in case he got lost. At one point, I offered to take him where he wanted to go, but he would not let me. He got so angry, I had no alternative but to call the police again. He was found on his way to Godridge on Highway 8. He was then taken to Clinton Emerge, examined and discharged. Although I was managing Wally at home, I was beginning to feel it getting to the time I should sign the papers for long-term care. I can say quite honestly, it was a relief. I didn't feel guilty as I knew it was going to be for the best. I'd gone through a gamut of emotion, anger at Wally for being ill, and now we couldn't do things together, frustration, loss of patience, when he couldn't do the simplest things. Then I did feel guilty, knowing deep down he couldn't help it. I have to thank the staff at the Alzheimer's Society for their ongoing support. Going to the support groups have helped so much, talking to caregivers in the same situation. All through this time, Wally has had good physical health. It is until last year when he developed a bowel obstruction. This, unfortunately, righted itself. I say that because I thought my prayers had been answered and he would finally be at peace. After recovery, he was transferred to the chronic care bed in Seaforth Hospital. While he was there, a bed became available at a long-term care home. He was transferred there with no problems and settled in quite well. The only problems there were Wally's persistent walking up and down the halls. He tended to be somewhat unsteady, so it was decided to try him in a wheelchair. I gave permission for a lap belt. This did not work out well. Wally still wanted to walk, and not realizing that there was a restraint, he fell often with a wheelchair. Luckily, no injuries. A few months later, another bed became available at a care home closer to home. Transition appeared to go well, until one Sunday morning, shortly after admission, Wally decided he wanted to go home. He became uncontrollable in a very short time. The staff had no other option than to call the police to help calm him and to keep the other residents safe. I was called, but by that time, and the time I arrived, I was no help, as he had got beyond control. After all else failed, the police had to put handcuffs on him and to transfer him to the police car to take him to hospital. After a time in emergency department, he was medicated and transferred back to the home. Fortunately and hopefully, this will be the last occurrence. I have spoken to the staff and requested that maybe iron sedation could be given before it becomes evident that reinforcements brought in. I don't think I will ever forget the look of Wally's eyes as they led him away. This incident was most stressful for all concerned, one staff member especially, who was in tears. All through this time, my emotions have been like a roller coaster. 1 minute feeling strong, able to cope, then plummet down to despair. Kind words often brought me to tears. I have tried to stay positive, but the hardest thing to cope with now is loneliness. Missing the one person who was your best friend and companion. Shopping for one and eating alone is hard to get used to. But with support and help, with help and support of family and friends, the Alzheimer's Society and staff in the care home, I will get through this. As this hideous disease claims the personality of my husband, I reflect on the good times we have shared in the past, and to try and make his no life as pleasant as possible. Wally has just had his 68th birthday.
How we have to just continue to implement BSO and how important the jobs are. So thank you, Pauline. Okay, so I'm at this point, I'm going to call on the next group to talk about our long-term care home success story. And again, share how we're making a difference, and really, and to share our successes. So I'm going to call on Shelley and Cam.
I'm Patty Mink. I'm the Director of Care at BHIN, which is a Grey County home with 150 residents. And first of all, to follow that story, oh my goodness. So thank you to Pauline, certainly again from all of us and from your family as well. What a beautiful story, and it's that type of care and commitment and love that is shown by the families day after day that keeps us going and our jobs worthwhile. So we have a story to share as well in regards to a resident that we've had to care for. First of all, I want to introduce my team. I have Shelley Ashby, who is our RN lead, and Hannah Dyer, who is my PSW lead. So the story topic that we chose, we were implementing innovative strategies to decrease the responsive behaviors in our home. I'll give you a little bit of history that we had. So we had a resident that was admitted to our facility from the community. This gentleman was approximately 80 years old. He came with increased confusion, increased wandering, increased agitation and aggression. We knew that this wasn't the man that he once was. We were unable to get him settled or to have him concentrate, including even during mealtime, and resulted in significant weight loss and wounds at that particular time as well. Visits from his family were very supportive, were often very strained, and we were trying to work really closely with his spouse as well. So what prompted our initiative? Significant decline in his overall health status, and his quality of life had changed drastically.
The BSS facilitating team and staff recognized the opportunity to better support this resident. The primary practitioner supported the team, and a referral was made to the hospital BSO mobile team as well. We hope to use this particular case as a building block for the remaining of our staff to start off small with someone that we felt we could help and move on. So the audience really was the overall staff and the residents' family. We met with the BSO mobile team, and we took staff input and family input to heart. To be honest, we used really one day to start off our planning, to hear from this resident's wife and the staff who worked with him on a daily basis, to brainstorm into some ideas. And from that point, we sort of worked for 1 to 2 weeks to roll out the initial changes and modified it as we went along. As you said, we did meet weekly to evaluate and review what changes we had made.
Our expected outcome, reductions in behavioral episodes, reduction in falls, and increased nutritional intake. We provided portable snack foods. When the resident was agitated, meals were provided outside of the dining room to decrease unnecessary distractions. The resident was allowed to wake naturally, and breakfast was offered at the time he woke up. Family photos were scanned and laminated for ease in collecting and carrying, and a picture of the resident and the spouse was given to them. Pain was monitored on a routine basis, and analgesic was offered. PRNs were utilized routinely to reduce anxiety before a crisis level was reached. We had routine huddles with the staff after each behavioral episode to help identify triggers and trends. We provided an iPod with music, and that went over very, very well. He was actually out dancing with the staff, and it was a real success. We provided farm magazines to him because of his farming background, and of course lots of family support to his wife.
The challenges were buy-in with staff. It was a gradual process. I'm sure, like many of you, we have the frontline staff, activation staff, and everyone has their little peg to fill. And to sort of mold those departments together took a bit of getting used to. And to maintain the momentum of the plan, we had moved floors or units to get consistency of care, ultimately to reach that consistency of care. But to get to that stage, because of master schedules and various different other things, we had to go through big changes. So the relationship that staff had formed when this gentleman first came in and could see him as he once was, it was difficult to transfer that to the next pile of staff that were coming in. Not that it was any of their fault, not that they didn't care as much as we did, but because you didn't know the man and his wife as well as we felt we did. But it has been maintained for the most part. Solutions, ongoing communication and input with all partners. The BSO PSW was actively on the unit, so I thought perhaps that sort of taking an active role and showing through my own work to demonstrate that, so that we didn't always have to rely on activation to find something to make this man happy, that we could take it on ourselves. The BSORN supported registered staff in the importance of following the hospital BSO recommendations, in particular the use of the PRN medications, which were sometimes missed and or not utilized to the amount that they could have been, and that sort of led to a crisis. If we kept on top of it, it wouldn't have come to the point that it was bad for everyone. We had informal huddles with staff, and we had a wonderful relationship with this man's wife and the rest of his family. And we just sort of have an ongoing plan. Nothing's set in stone, and we just carry on the best we can.
The results and next steps, success. It was successful, which was wonderful for us, for the family, all the staff. The resident was able to enjoy increased quality of life, able to engage in meaningful conversations and visits with his wife. His health status improved, his appetite improved, his weight increased, and his wounds healed. Resident displayed decreased agitation and anxiety, and the best part was those shining eyes. Bob was back. Staff understanding of behaviors were increased, and the successes were shared with the residents' family and staff and posted in the front lobby for all to see. Next steps, initiation of the iPod project, music therapy, Montessori activities have now been accepted by staff. Recognition of individualized approach, example, waking naturally, is being utilized with a number of residents now, and increased collaboration between all departments.
Do one final comment on this one as well. This gentleman has progressed through the disease. The disease has taken him to another level, which we know happens. And so, although he's changing drastically, what we have put into place over the last few months isn't necessarily as effective as it was at that particular time. The staff have carried that with them. They know that we had some successes, and they talk wonderfully with this spouse, who now we have a terrific rapport with. She speaks to others who are coming in who are at a different stage with Alzheimer's or with dementia, and she talks as well about the support that she received from the BSO team and from the BSO support team in the hospital, and what a significant change it meant for her, even if it was only for a few small weeks. So although he's changing and he's at a different level at this particular time, that story has just resonated throughout our home. So we're very thankful for that.
Really great, a really good, another really good example of providing that patient-centered care, and the other population of BSO that's not forgotten but not as emphasized is the caregiver, and we're seeing that making sure that communication is made with the caregiver and the rest of the team. We see how much of an impact that really makes. So thank you for sharing. Our last story today, I believe, is from Mount Hope Center for Long-Term Care. Mary, Susan, and Brennan, please. Second one.
I have my own pancake stuff here. Hi, everybody. I'm Mary. I'm overwhelmed by these success stories. It's very heartwarming. And makes me think, oh my goodness, mine's not going to compare. But anyhow, you're stuck with it. So last time. Pushing this button, right? Okay, the down button. Okay. So, we sort of combined, we're supposed to have one title, but we combined it. So an internal BSO referral process and promoting the BSO project. So it's actually really about our referral process and how that has worked effectively. So our challenge was, Mount Hope is a really big long-term care facility. I'm guessing the biggest one, I might be wrong, but we have 394 residents, 2 buildings, and 10 units. And because of our size, communicating the BSO initiative to all the staff was a big, big challenge. So our goals included formalizing our function and our accountabilities, informing all staff about our existence and our role, and promoting the overall success of the program. The newly created BSO team was really quite excited and enthusiastic to be a support to the staff and residents. Our outcome was to become an essential part of Mount Hope, and I'd like to say yay, I think we are, and to be accepted and valued for what we could offer in terms of support and resources. We wanted the staff to know that we could help. So what prompted our initiative? Obviously, the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care funding put the program in place, and so we formed a resource team and wanted the staff to know about us and use us as a resource in managing responsive behaviors. So our leadership, I am the RN and I work 3 days a week, and I'm very fortunate to have a full-time PSW, 5 days a week, and a part-time PSW who does the filling. At Mount Hope, we're called primary care providers, so PCP. So if I make a mistake and say PCP, but anyhow, so we're very fortunate in our funding or how it works out. I'm not sure whether management team actually bumped it up. I don't know how it worked out, but it's great. So our partnership, our director, who I was hoping would be here today, she didn't quite make it. The resident care coordinators, the staff educator, and I have to give kudos to our staff educator. She really helped me pull this part and did some word changing for me to make it look professional. And the corporate behavior response team, and I feel like I know them as best friends. They all know me. So our audience, obviously, was our long-term care home staff in terms of communication and promotion. However, the end result would be that our residents would benefit from staff education and the work of the BSO team. We reached our staff audience through multiple bulletins outlining the accountabilities of the team, updates, policy changes, etc. We also visited each unit, outlining our goals and our role of supporting the staff. Email and voicemail access was created to improve accessibility, and as the team members also carried pages to make it easier for staff to reach us. So our timeline, I started in March, the PSW team started in April, and it's an ongoing timeline. We evaluate our small successes every day. Anyhow, up there, samples of the bulletin items sent to Mount Hope, and again, this is the staff educator. She sends out a weekly bulletin, and she really put into words what BSO stands for, what it means, and kept putting out really cool little memos. You can see there's a picture of us up there too. Wow. She said, do you mind having a picture taken? And then towards, and I'm not sure of the date on this one, but not too long ago, we decided to put out a little thank you just from us. And she put it in for us. And just to let everybody know that we really do appreciate their help. This is our original memo that came out, Behavioural Supports Team Comes to Mount Hope, and which started it out. So our expected outcomes so far, we've had an increased number of referrals. We've had verbalized appreciation from staff. I actually had somebody say to me, there should be more of you. There should be more of you. And, you know, that's been a big success. Decreased resident responsive behaviors, such as evidenced by fewer episodes of reported aggression and injury. We reevaluate our goals routinely, and we look for new interventions. Again, same challenges we've all had: poor buy-in, skepticism, and another one that we have had, and we're working on baby steps, is failure to, or resistance to using the interventions that we've recommended. And that, again, becomes a baby step. So our solutions, we listen, we try to project a positive attitude, we encourage, we provide rationale, we praise improvements, we model and demonstrate the tools that we're suggesting. One-to-one explanations, bulletin items written in a positive positive manner has also helped promote our acceptance. And additional education for the BSO team members has allowed the team to project more confidence and address staff concerns more effectively. And we actually really have done a lot of education. We have completed, or will complete on Monday, crucial conversations. We've done You First, which we haven't done. Bernadine is going to go do Montessori next week. And we pick up every opportunity we can. We did the dementia and sexuality online the other day, and so we're trying. To date, we've had a lot of referrals. I personally can't keep up with the referrals or the paperwork. And the girls are saying, I often hear Susan say, I didn't have time for lunch today. So we're busy. The offshoots from the BSO initiative include staff involvement with developing interventions and tools to problem solve responsive behaviors, thereby improving the quality of the care provided to residents. Thank you.
That was a great story. I think it's really helpful to hear how you use various methods to promote BSO within your long-term care home, and how you are using that approach of consistently telling your story, retelling your story. So that probably helped with getting that stuff going in. So great work. Thank you. We actually do have one more success story to share, and that's from Tara's Lodge. And it's Andrea and Jody.
Hi, my name's Jody, and I'm the PSW lead at Terrace Lodge. And Andre and I worked on this project together. Normally I would say they saved the best to last, but I've been blown away by them all, so that's not the case here. Okay, so our story topic was implementing an innovative strategy to decrease responsive behaviors. The problem we came up with, the challenge, was that we had a resident at our home that was self-transferring. It was resulting in a very high number of falls. The resident had trust issues with the staff, and didn't believe that we would come to their aid when necessary, so that was what was doing the self-transferring. What prompted our initiative was a BSO referral that was submitted to us regarding the number of falls this resident was having. The leadership, Andre and I took on this project. Partnerships was the entire BSO team. We implemented the primary care PSW plan after collaborating with residents' family, staff, our administration, and insightful input and positive feedback was provided by all the parties involved. So those of you that aren't familiar with primary care, we basically assigned one PSW to her to do as much as they could with that person, bathing, care, answering call bells when necessary, to try to build up trust with them. So our audience was, we sent out an email originally to registered staff, informing them of this trial and the need for them to do the assigning of a PSW per day and afternoon shift. Memos were also posted in our communication book, nurses station, and the wing kitchenettes, alerting all staff of the outline of what a primary care PSW would be doing, the plan details, and also the expectations. Weekly meetings updated any staff who were not aware of the initiative, and also BSO team presence on the floor educated staff. I work mainly on the floor this resident was on, so I did a lot of education with the staff. Our timeline, it really didn't take a lot. This resident, with the issues she was having with trust, primary care, kind of came to us right off the bat. So we really only used 2 hours of research and planning, and it took about 3 days to implement the plan, which was educating all the staff involved, the steps and the goals, and hanging up all the posters and such. So our expected outcome was that the resident is now more trusting of the staff, no longer self-transferring as frequently, and is experiencing fewer falls. Definitely the challenges, like everyone said, is kind of the buy-in. Some staff were very resistant to being assigned to the resident and changing routine. Primary care wasn't something that had been used in the home for over a decade, so it was kind of a big change to implement that. Registered staff had to remember to assign people as the primary care PSW, and this posed quite a challenge at first, just one extra step. It always seemed to get missed. So our solutions were that the BSO team members encouraged staff with small successes at our weekly meetings, which helped open the minds of some of the staff members to the possibility of this being successful long-term. A clipboard ended up being put in the nurses station with a chart of the days and the shifts on it, so registered staff could just easily fill in the blanks as a reminder to assign a primary care attendant for that day. And a friendly reminder email was also issued to all registered staff. So our results and next steps were the resident has stopped self-transferring and falls have significantly decreased. We went from 46 falls in a month period to 8 in our trial period. The resident has gained trust and bonded with a few staff members and enjoys chatting with these staff. The resident has been using the call bell and patiently waiting for staff to attend to them. The resident has stated such things as, "I now know that someone will come to me." Next steps are our BSO team assigns staff to resident week by week, and we posted it in the nurses station and the kitchenette for all staff to see. This took the responsibility off of the registered staff, and it assured that it was getting done on a consistent basis. Residents who have been referred to BSO with responsive behaviors will be looked at to see if a similar initiative of primary care will be successful for them.
We'll see with all these success stories that, the common themes we've been seeing is communication, collaboration, and persistence. And as Kelly showed at the beginning of the day, success in a straight line, it takes time. And so it might go forwards, might go backwards, but overall everyone's moving forward, everyone has small successes, learning successes. It's really, really great to see, and I hope that's inspiring to everyone. So we actually will be having I'll be having a break right now. So while this break, maybe you can go grab some coffee, etc. But we really encourage you to use this time to speak with those who have presented today.
Thank you very much. So it is an absolute pleasure for me to introduce Bonnie Purcell. She presented actually this past spring at our BSO kickoff. The feedback was fantastic, particularly that her son is quite cute. So we have her back by popular demand, the topic that she speaks about. Bonnie is a member of the Geriatric Mental Health Program at LHIN Health Sciences. She's actually been in our program for 1 year now. And she provides accessible care. Okay, I'm going to use my outdoor voice. This one's working. So are we okay if I maybe just start over again? So Bonnie has been a psychologist or a member of our, sorry. She's finishing her PhD actually this November. Bonnie has been with the Geriatric Mental Health Program for a year now, and she provides assessment, therapy, and consultation specializing in older adults with addictions. She also has a provincial role in addictions and with older adults in addictions and seniors. Again, she did a really wonderful presentation in the spring with the BSO kickoff, so we're so excited to have her provide further information, and maybe we'll see another picture of her son. Thank you.
Hello. So I'm going to be talking about screening and intervention for alcohol-related problems in long-term care. A lot of the slides are going to be similar to the ones that I presented in February, but I know a lot of the BSO staff weren't able to attend that, and I really want everyone to have the same base with which to work with older adults with addiction issues. And I know that your training doesn't often provide that addiction stuff, so for some people, this is where you get it. So I'm really hoping to, nail down some important points for you all. So here's the outline of my talk. I'll be providing some definitions on alcohol-related behavior, and then go into the best practices for screening. Screening is where I do my research, and so that's what I'm most passionate about. So I'll be talking to you about what type of approach to take and 2 screening tools that I highly recommend that you use. One of them being the one that I designed. I, of course, get no money from it, but I do get notoriety, so please use it. And then I'll spend probably a lot of the time on intervention, so talking about identifying where the person is and pinpointing what type of intervention is appropriate for that person. And as I did last time, I will keep you interested by telling you right now that I have a very cute child. And at the end of my presentation, you will see just how cute he is. He does look a lot like me. And for those of you who saw him in February, he's even cuter. And you just have to ask my colleagues, he's really cute. And while I'm talking, I'm going to be going through a case example. My presentation looks different than the way I designed it. Anyways, this is Mr. C, and this is an actual referral that we received from a London Middlesex long-term care home. I've changed a lot of his identifying information, but some things are still going to be recognizable for those of you that work with this gentleman, so please help me keep his identity anonymous. So I'm going to call him Mr. C, and you can see from his picture why his name is Mr. C. He is a 72-year-old widower living in long-term care facility for the past year. He has a long-standing history of alcohol dependence, but had been sober for the 4 weeks prior to moving into long-term care. And he was sober because he was hospitalized following a fall. And then he was deemed he wasn't functionally capable of living on his own or with his daughter, so he moved to long-term care. When he entered the home, the doctor provided an order for 1 to 2 beers a day. So he has this with the home's permission, but this gentleman has his lovely daughter sneak in extra beers in her bag during their visits, which are about 3 times a week. And she completely denies this. So you ask her about it, and she will completely deny it. And this is a real story. So Mr. C takes these beers from his lovely daughter and hides them throughout his private room. And it's gotten so bad that the nursing staff will actually go through his belongings after he leaves his room to seek out these extra beers. And when Mr. C is intoxicated, the responsive behaviors come out, and this is why we got the referral. So he becomes physically agitated, verbally aggressive with staff and other residents, and he refuses personal care. In the referral, you can see that this man is not the healthiest guy. He has a history of depression, which is currently not being treated. He has diabetes, hypertension, arthritis, peripheral neuropathy, and glaucoma. The long-term care staff, the BSO staff, actually completed a GDS with him. He was 4 out of 15, so that's not suggestive of depression. And he also had an MMSE of 30 out of 30. So this suggests this man is cognitively intact and able to make these decisions. Prior to my involvement, the home, in collaboration with this gentleman and his family, enacted a contract that limited this gentleman to his prescribed 1 to 2 beers a day. And if he was to consume alcohol outside of these 1 to 2 that he's allowed in the home, they were to report it to the nursing staff, which they never did. And if he was found with what I'll call contraband beer, then he was going to have his doctor's orders just revoked. So he was going to not have any drinking privileges. He was good for the first few days, and then he had a little relapse where he got caught with beer. But there were no consequences, so the contract went up. So that's the context, a very good example of how you might see alcohol-related problems in long-term care. And here I'll go into some interesting definitions. So in Canada, we defined low-risk drinking guidelines as no more than 2 standard drinks per day, with a weekly maximum of 14 for men and 9 for women. And when they developed these low-risk drinking guidelines, these were for perfectly healthy individuals. So these guidelines do not apply if the person has serious health problems, such as liver disease or psychiatric illnesses, if they're taking certain medications such as sedatives, sleeping pills, painkillers, antihypertensives, or psychoactive drugs, or if they have a personal or family history of alcohol use disorders. So if you think about your senior clientele living in your long-term care facilities, how many people fall into those exceptions? A lot, a lot. And that's why we have different guidelines for older adults. So moderate consumption is defined as a maximum of 1 drink per day. That's it. And you're allowed, actually, 2 drinks per day for special occasions, and dinner is not a special occasion. These guidelines are supported by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. So there is a great spectrum of alcohol-related behavior. On one end of the spectrum, you've got people who are abstinent, so not drinking at all, or those who are drinking in terms of like low risk, so they're not drinking more than 1 drink per day. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got individuals who we might describe as classic alcoholics, so individuals who meet the psychiatric criteria for an alcohol use disorder. I am so sorry, that's going to be on film. Oh my goodness. So the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, which psychiatrists, physicians and psychologists use to diagnose, we use that very particular diagnosis of an alcohol use disorder to really describe the severe end. And in the previous edition, we used to have a differentiation between dependence and abuse. So abuse was just excessive drinking that might lead to some negative consequences, and dependence was more like you're physically dependent, or you develop tolerance, or there's a withdrawal syndrome if individuals stop drinking. But lots of other organizations, especially the World Health Organization, has recognized this gray area in the middle for individuals who might drink more than what's considered low risk, and they might place themselves at greater risk for negative consequences. So we're going to look at these 3 sort of groups, and we're going to tailor intervention accordingly depending on where they fall in the spectrum. So you might be wondering why I like to talk about seniors and drinking, and that's simply because as the older you get, your body just doesn't take alcohol the way that you used to. I'm sure all of you have noticed, why can't I drink my face off like I used to when I was 16? And that's because your body doesn't want you to. There's a decline in lean mass, a reduced water content in the body, and a decrease in gastric alcohol dehydrogenase enzyme. So when you compare an older person and a younger person drinking the same amount of alcohol, the older person will have an increased blood alcohol concentration in their blood, just from biology. No one can avoid this. This is just the way it is. So not only do we have increased concentrations of alcohol in your blood, but because of a decline in kidney and liver functions, alcohol stays in your body for longer. So we have to be really careful about what we're putting in our bodies, just in general. I mean, we shouldn't put marbles or something, so why can't we be a little bit more careful with alcohol? I said marbles because I'm a toddler. He's never put a marble in his nose, though. But he's really cute. He likes to wear a frog hat. There. That's to keep you interested for the end. Frog hat. Also, when we talk about seniors, we have to talk about the potential for interactions of alcohol with medications. And we have to, for example, we have to watch out for disulfiram-like reactions. And disulfiram is the generic name for a medication called Antabuse that they used to prescribe for alcoholics. And what it used to do is if you took Antabuse every day, whenever you took a drink of an alcoholic beverage, it would make you violently ill. It would make you flushed, nauseous, all those horrible things. And so we have to watch out for people taking these particular medications. An interesting side note is that 40% of Asians have this naturally. They're missing the particular enzyme that metabolizes a part of alcohol. So I'm actually falling into this group. So I'm on Antabuse all the time. So I don't like to drink very much because it makes me feel so sick. 3 sips and I'm in the bathroom. So if the image of me throwing up in the bathroom will help you recognize disulfiram-like reactions, please go there. Go there. There are lots of other medications we have to watch out for in terms of interactions, and I have to go to my notes because I am not a physician, so I can't remember these things. But things like aspirin, as well as certain antibiotics, increase your blood alcohol level, just the way it is. Acetaminophen and some antibiotics increase the risk of liver damage. Antihistamines, barbiturates, benzos, opioids, sedatives, hypnotics, tricyclics, anything that impacts the central nervous system and has a depressive effect, alcohol will amplify that. And that's even more prominent in seniors. We really have to be careful about that. Warfarin is a very interesting medication in that acute use, so just using it a little bit, will actually increase the effectiveness of the drug. So actually, you're making the blood even thinner than you intended. So if someone falls and they have an open wound, they're more likely to bleed out because that blood won't clot. Chronic use of alcohol with warfarin is the opposite. It decreases the effectiveness of that warfarin. And so it's actually not thinning the blood as it should, and so you're at increased risk of clots, because that's what the warfarin is for. So just something to keep an eye on. There are also a number of psychosocial risk factors that happen in older age. There are so many life changes that if you're not ready to cope with, or if you're not prepared for, it's very easy to fall back to use alcohol as a coping strategy. So retirement is a big change for a lot of these individuals. And if they're not ready to know, they're not preparing, well, what am I going to do after retirement? If they're figuring out who they are after the fact, because maybe they've spent their entire life sort of defining themselves by their occupation. And a lot of us do that. We love our jobs. But take away that job and who are we? And that is challenging for a lot of older adults. Lots of losses occur in older age. Loss of loved ones, divorce, separation, empty nest, decreased social network because maybe your older friends are moving into long-term care or they're moving closer to be with their children or grandchildren. These things happen. Change in physical health or vigor, change in meaning of life, as I was saying, as well as changes in independence. When I move into long-term care, what am I going to be able to do for myself? How much personal control will I have? And how much do I want compared to what they're providing? So these things are really jarring for an individual and can really challenge your ego. Like, what the heck am I supposed to do here? So unless the individuals have the appropriate coping strategies, alcohol might become an easy way out to distract themselves or take them somewhere else. So this slide just lists the symptoms of alcohol misuse in seniors, and what you'll notice is they're fairly non-specific. They can be related to depression, to dementia, or some people might even say it's the normal process of aging. And that's one of the reasons why alcohol-related problems is under detect, is that people are misattributing the effects of alcohol to other things that might be common in older age. There are lots of detrimental health consequences due to alcohol use. Injury from falls is a big one, and that certainly was the case with Mr. C, my case example. Increased risk of heart disease, or liver disease, heart problems, GI disorders, sexual dysfunction, the list goes on, including dementia. It can often make dementia worse, or it can actually cause dementia, and alcohol-related dementia. So back to Mr. C. Prior to, well, Mr. C's POA is his daughter, who lives just outside the city limits. And she visits 3 times a week, always takes him out to lunch, and also, for some reason, whenever they come back, Mr. C has a full supply of beer. But when I called to speak to her, she completely refused to speak to me. Wouldn't even entertain the thought of speaking to me, just asked me to call her brother. So when I talked to the oldest son, he was actually able to provide a lot of the important background information about who Mr. C was. And he worked in a high-stress postal career. I hope you got that joke because of the picture. Mr. C, Santa Claus. So he was in this career until retirement 10 years ago in 2003. And part of the reason why he retired was because his wife passed away and he couldn't cope. He couldn't go to work. So what he did was his drinking increased. And shortly after the wife passed away, the daughter sort of swooped in and became the primary caregiver. And she just sort of took on that role. So the wife avoided all conflict and sort of did everything that the husband wanted, and the daughter did the same thing. And Mr. C lived with the daughter prior to moving into long-term care. I should say that the daughter is also single, so doesn't have her own family to look after, so she really identified with this caregiver role. Mr. C's oldest son also reported that his father had basically been drinking as long as he could remember, and could actually drink up to 20 cans of beer in the past and still be upright. That's how severe the dependence was, and the tolerance. And although Mr. C denied any family history of alcoholism, the son reported that his father and mother were alcoholics, and there was also a youngest son that Mr. C failed to tell me about, who actually died of alcoholism. So at this point, I'm questioning what's going on with Mr. C. Why is he not filling in those gaps for me? Is it denial? Does he not want to share this information with me? Or could it be cognitive impairment that we're not picking up? The son also reported that his dad had a sober period for 10 years in the past, and was actually a mentor in Alcoholics Anonymous. And the son coincided this sober period with when Mr. C was actually being treated for his depression. So he was actually on an antidepressant. And for whatever reason, after that 10-year period, he stopped, and then the drinking started again. So as I said, he's had numerous falls leading to multiple hospitalizations prior to coming to long-term care. And he's had, I think it was 6 or 7 CT or MRI scans in the past maybe 6 years that showed severe atrophy, severe for his age. So his excessive alcohol use was actually impacting the health of his brain. So which made me question, where is he cognitively? He may have gotten 30 out of 30 on the MMSE, but that's not a super great tool for looking at cognitive impairment. So I did the Montreal cognitive exam with him, and he was 17 out of 30, which is the dementia range. Also with this gentleman, he had reduced mobility due to his falls. So he was wheelchair bound completely. So in terms of screening, we need to do this a little bit more than we do. Unfortunately, we just tend not to get into the routine of screening. So we know that physicians speak to their clients about alcohol use less than 50% of the time. And a very small group of those individuals use a screening tool. And a screening tool is really important because it's a standardized way of asking alcohol-related information, but also there has to be research that supports that the screening tool actually elicits that information that's truthful and useful to you. So when we don't use a screening tool, we don't know how people are asking those questions, and we don't know what kind of reaction we're eliciting. Are we eliciting denial or defensiveness when you ask a question like, "You don't drink alcohol, do you?" And people will say no, because they don't want that negative stigma associated with it. And generally what we see is that healthcare providers generally only ask about alcohol use if the person presents with a problem. And unfortunately with that is that we're not being proactive about identifying those people who might be at risk and where intervention might be the most useful. And unfortunately, physicians tend to be less able to detect older alcoholics as compared to younger. In terms of your general approach to screening, be friendly, be non-judgmental, non-threatening, be sensitive about the stigma that these older folks grew up in their era. I mean, they grew up with the prohibition where drinking was not allowed. They grew up in an era where people were taught you don't talk about your problems to other people. You keep it to yourself and you solve it yourself. So try not to use stigmatizing words such as alcoholic. Of course, I've used it like 16 times already. But you're drink alcohol. It might be part of their lifestyle. And often, if you put the context of sort of asking about alcohol use in terms of medical health and nutrition, older adults are used to talking about that. They're used to be engaging with physicians, so they're used to talking about those medical sort of aspects of their life. Avoid using stigmatizing terms, and also there's an important piece in speaking with family or friends for collateral information, especially if the senior displays denial or defensiveness or has any cognitive impairment. Of course, as was the case with Mr. C, sometimes, family can also display denial as well. So talking to different family members might be more helpful to you. So I have two screening tools to show you. The first is the Senior Alcohol Misuse Indicator, or the SAMI, and you all have copies of that in your handout. Last year I only brought 20 of each, and of course there were like 3,000 of you, so I couldn't get it to everyone, but I hope that because you have it in your package, feel free to photocopy them. They're not copyrighted, and use them whenever you deem fit. So the SAMI was developed at the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health in the University of Toronto, specifically to be a sensitive and soft way to address alcohol-related conversations with older adults. So we're very particular about the ordering of the questions. We're very particular about the language we use. So the first question is just a checklist of some symptoms that may be caused by or exacerbated by alcohol use. Certainly there are other reasons why people might identify with these symptoms, but I think we need to be aware when these symptoms are present and whether there's alcohol use, because certainly that is a possibility. The second question assesses whether the person actually consumes alcohol. So we use the word enjoy because it has a positive connotation and it normalizes that, yes, you should be enjoying wine, beer, spirits. And we also use that term wine, beer, spirits because some seniors have differing definitions of what alcohol is. I know one senior I met with did not define beer as alcohol. He thought that was just a normal drink. But it is, it's alcohol. And we ask about what they prefer. The third question looks at the change, as their life has changed, how has their use of their alcohol changed? So really looking into changes of pattern. Are they drinking more than they used to? Are they drinking less or the same? The fourth looks at whether or not there's still enjoyment in terms of alcohol. And some individuals with fairly severe drinking problems will say they no longer enjoy alcohol, but they do it because it keeps certain symptoms at bay, like withdrawal symptoms. And the last question is sort of the teaching piece, which asks the respondent to really look at the symptoms they identified in question one and ask them to consider whether or not their drinking might be related to those. So the SAMI is not a typical screening tool where you just check all the yeses and count them and then that's your score. Because it's so soft and vague and open-ended, it's actually pretty challenging to score, and that's probably one of the criticisms of a SAMI. It works very well in detecting at-risk and problem drinkers, but people don't really like to use the scoring part, so I'm going to walk you through it. Basically, a score of 1 or more is suggestive of an at-risk or problem drinker, and a point is awarded depending on how they answered the specific questions. So if the respondent says that they enjoy any or all of wine, beer, spirits, or they say they enjoy a combination of two of them, you give them 1 point. If they say that they've increased their alcohol consumption from when they were younger, that's a point. They say, yeah, I see that alcohol might be impacting my physical health. That's another point. And then there's multiple responses that sort of combine to give you a point. So if they admit to enjoying alcohol and they report not having changed their alcohol consumption, that's another point. And lastly, if they report experiencing 5 or more symptoms in that first question, and they admit to enjoying alcohol, and they identify that they're currently consuming alcohol, that's another point. So you just need one of those answers to be positive on your screening tool. It's complicated. It's not fun. You watch yourselves, I'm watching you. This is the shortened Michigan Alcoholism Screening Test geriatric version. And this was the first geriatric screening tool that was really specific for looking at alcohol-related problems among older adults. And what you'll know from the questions is, as soon as you read it, you know that someone's asking you about whether or not you have a drinking problem. And that's the one thing that SAMI doesn't. It's so gentle and vague, you don't really know what they're asking, which makes it harder to score too. But this one, when talking with others, do you ever underestimate how much you actually drink? You're asking me if I'm an alcoholic. And so because it's so face value, you know exactly what the person's asking for, it's more likely to elicit that denial or defensiveness if they want to hide a problem. So you might be saying, well, why is it useful if you're telling me that the other one is better? But it actually is useful because it can give you targets for therapy or harm reduction. So if they identify, I drink because it decreases my shakiness or tremors, that's something to work on. Is that the withdrawal symptom? Is there something else going on? Is there some Parkinsonian symptoms that they're dealing with? If they identify that they drink because to address their grief, depression, loneliness, then maybe depression is something that we have to target here. Maybe that's why they're drinking. If they're saying they're drinking instead of having meals, wow, nutrition is a big issue. Let's talk about vitamin B shots if this person needs it. And if they say they do it to take their minds off their problems, well, what sorts of stressors are going on? Is there an underlying trauma that we might have to look at? So with the SMAS-G, any yes is scored with 1 point, and you only need 2 to identify an alcohol abuse problem. So the SAMI looks at risk and problem drinking, which is sort of that grayish area, whereas the SMAS-G looks at sort of the more severe problem area. So with Mr. C, when I went to go see him, he was sitting in his private room watching TV. He was kind enough to agree to let me talk about how to make his experience in long-term care better. And that's my vague approach. I don't say, I want to see if you have a drinking problem and how I can help the long-term care manage your drinking problem. I go in a soft approach and spin it on him. I want to make his stay more comfortable, and how can I do that? So I spent 30 minutes obtaining a psychosocial and medical history, and I didn't need to do that because everything's on the chart. Most of it's on the chart, but a lot of the 30 minutes is about building rapport, getting him to trust me, letting him know that I'm not there to tell him he's doing something wrong, but just really get to know him, get to know his story, and see how I can help him. So by the time I was ready to do the screening tools, Mr. C was in great spirits. He readily smiled and he laughed and made lots of jokes. So I used the SAMI to introduce the topic of alcohol use, and if I'm going to ask about alcohol, I always use the SAMI first, because I don't know off the bat if I'm going to elicit denial or defensiveness. For this individual, I had a sense that I might be, because he's been struggling with this problem for a long time, and he scored 1 out of 5, so that's positive for an at-risk or problem drinker, and he stated that he enjoyed all types of alcohol, so that was 1 point right there. And he was happy to answer those questions. There was no denial or defensiveness elicited, but he also denied any health concerns, which is very unusual considering in the referral I had this whole list of health concerns that he had, and he completely denied it, which made me wary about what's going on cognitively. I did follow up with the SMAS-G, and he scored 2 out of 10, so that's positive. So he admitted that sometimes he underestimates what he drinks, and he said that others have expressed concern about his drinking. They may have tried to quit in the past. This gentleman did in the past, and he may think to himself, I failed, so why bother trying again? And there's lots of enabling attitudes and behaviors that we can see. Family members are busy protecting the individual from experiencing those consequences of their heavy drinking, that they never have a reason to change their drinking. So we have that in the case with Mr. C, with the daughter continually bringing in the alcohol. And for her, it was about her comfort, because she didn't want to address the conflict. She didn't want to be arguing with her father. It was easier to do what he said. Also, we have sometimes challenges in terms of attitudes of health professionals. So we know that physicians are less likely to refer older heavy drinkers to treatment, even though they're just as likely as younger adults to succeed in treatment, but there's that bias there. So the first type of intervention I will talk to you about is a brief intervention, and these are aimed at at-risk drinkers. So these might be individuals that just drink above low-risk drinking guidelines and may not recognize how their alcohol use impacts their health. So we know from research that a clinician's simple advice to cut down on alcohol consumption can actually modify the patient's behavior, and that's just a one-time deal, and that works. And in one randomized controlled trial, which is a type of study where you just have a group of patients and you sort of randomly put them in either the group that gets the brief intervention or the group that just gets business as usual, drinking is reduced by 36% in the brief intervention group. And we know that these work with whether it's a psychologist or a social worker or a physician or a nurse providing that brief intervention. So what does a brief intervention look like? Well, it's about increasing the motivation for that person to change their behavior. So identifying pros and cons of their alcohol use, and lots of individuals may not recognize what the cons are. So for an at-risk drinker, they may not realize that drinking their 2 glasses of wine a day impacts their blood pressure, that they really should be wary of that. And so giving that feedback may help them change that behavior. So change will only occur when perceived costs of drinking outweigh the perceived benefits. And oftentimes we don't recognize that there are benefits to drinking with these individuals. They're drinking for a reason. That behavior did not sort of surface in a vacuum. This person has a story, a reason. Oftentimes, especially with fairly severe problem drinkers, there's childhood adversity, there's trauma, or there's a family history. That's how they learn from their parents to cope with difficult situations. So taking away the alcohol isn't going to help that person if you don't address why they're drinking. So in your brief intervention, please provide advice and a clear, simple message that expresses concern about their use. Provide them feedback about how that their use impacts their health and life. And their goal may be reduction or abstinence. So for individuals that are cognitively intact, sharing positive screening tools is very important, and that can be your way of providing that brief intervention. So describing the impact of that alcohol has on the person's health. So the screening results indicate that perhaps alcohol might be having a negative effect on your blood pressure. That in itself is a brief intervention. You're pointing 2 and 2 equals 4. But not only do you tell them what the consequences are, but you have to give them sort of ideas on how to change their behavior. Because pointing it out only addresses one half of the problem. If they don't feel like they have the strategies to figure out how to do it, they're less likely to do it. So that's at-risk drinkers. So those are individuals drinking just above low-risk drinking guidelines who might not recognize how alcohol impacts their health. The stages of change is a great sort of theory on how to think about any sort of behavior change, but it really helps for individuals who have the more severe drinking problems. So this theory was originally developed by Prochaska and DiClemente in 1977, and these 2 researchers just watched a group of people quit smoking, and they said, oh, these are the stages that they go through. And now it's been used in lots of different contexts, and all through the addictions field, so not just smoking, but alcohol or illicit drugs, but also for other health behavior changes like exercise or changing your diet. So we know that individuals progress through the different stages, and movement can be forward, backward, or cyclical. Relapse is the rule and not the exception. And depending on where they are in these stages, that's how you address their issues. So I'll go through that. That was sort of a bumble of stuff, but this will be better. So the first stage is pre-contemplation, which means I am not changing for you or for myself or for anyone. I'm happy the way I am, and I'm not even going to consider changing. And for that type of individual, what you want to do is you want to go through the pros and cons with them and help them identify some cons, but also readily identify their pros too. And you really want to provide personalized information about risks if there's no change or if what the benefits of change are. So pros and cons of their current drinking, as well as the pros and cons of change. Because they might recognize there's some benefit to changing their drinking habits, but there are also cons. It's going to cost. It's going to be a lot of effort. Can I do it? What happens to my social support network if the only people who hang out with me are my drinking buddies? So these are realistic concerns that we have to address before helping someone move into the next stage. And the next stage is contemplation, where they're sort of ambivalent. They see the pros and the cons, but they're not ready to commit. So they're thinking about, well, maybe in the next 6 months, I might consider changing. And for that individual, you're going to be helping to motivate them and encourage that individual to set goals and make specific plans. And it might be testing out what it might look like to change their behavior. So if I cut my drinking from 2 bottles of wine to 1, how might I do that? And you can do experiments. Well, let's try it one day, see what happens. Can you do it? What sorts of things do we need to address to help you make that commitment? In preparation, they're ready to take action in the next month, so you're helping them brainstorm what types of barriers will we encounter and how can we arm you with some strategies to cope with those barriers or overcome those barriers. Action means you change the behavior for less than 6 months, so you're providing problem-based learning experiences. Relapse might occur in action, and that's where we take those relapses and turn them into learning moments. What did we not foresee? What led you to this relapse, and how can we prevent that from happening again? And maintenance, that means the person's changed their behavior for more than 6 months. So you're, again, providing that social support, helping with them problem solving, positively addressing slips and relapses, and giving them as much support as possible. And an important concept, as I've probably said too many times already, is the decisional balance. So we're weighing those pros and cons. And we have to do the pros and cons of everything. Lots of times these heavy drinkers have heard the cons of their drinking. They hear it all the time. But unless it comes from within and they believe those cons, they're not going to change their behavior. And unless you also recognize that there are pros, it helps me drown out my traumatic memories when I was abused as a child. You can't take that away from me, because what do I have left if you take that from me? So those things have to be addressed. Self-efficacy is also an important concept. For anyone to move from one stage to the next, they have to feel confident that they can do it. Because if they can't do it, they're not going to. So we can hear till we're blue in the face that we should make this change. I should cut sugar out of my diet. I don't wanna, so I'm not going to, unless I get that buy-in, unless something within myself says, it's time. For me, the cons of eating copious amounts of sugar outweigh the pros. I don't want to go too much through motivational interviewing because I did a lot of that in February. So I'm going to skip through that because I think I'll skip through most of it, but there's certainly some important aspects of how to work with someone who's a heavy drinker who's thinking about change. And what you need to do when you're working with them is you have to express empathy. You have to accept them for who they are, drinking heavily or not. You have to be warm, you have to be open to hear their story and recognize their personal value. These people have stories. These people have reasons for their drinking. And you need to hear that context. It's very easy to discount someone because, oh, they're an alcoholic. That's just the way they are. But they're more than that, and we do that in dementia care all the time. That person's crazy. They're out of control. They're just aggressive and mean and nasty. But there's a disease process there going on. So we have to understand the person of who they are. And this is a really good slide that reminds us what not to do. So what are the roadblocks to listening? What sorts of things can I communicate to them that I'm the boss and I'm going to tell you what to do? And that's what this list is. So ordering, directing, or commanding, warning or threatening, giving advice or making suggestions or providing solutions without their permission says to them, I'm the expert and you're going to do it as I say because you don't know what you're doing with your life. Persuading with logic, lecturing, moralizing, disagreeing, shaming, ridiculing, and we all do this. We all do this in regular life. But alcoholics are very sensitive to that. So we have to watch out for that. And it's a daily struggle. It's a struggle for me to be wary of these roadblocks. Okay. So I'll talk about pharmacological interventions, and then I'll go through harm reduction, and then I'll sort of summarize what has happened with Mr. C, and then you'll see my cute baby. So in terms of pharmacological interventions, there is disulfiram, which I described to you, which is antabuse, which is not recommended for seniors. I never want to see it because of the potentially serious adverse effects, but also there's an increased risk of delirium. We don't want that. So the first line pharmacological approach is naltrexone, and that's been shown to be effective in improving relapse rates in heavy drinking for veterans from 50 to 70 years of age, but not helping in achieving abstinence. But we do know that when naltrexone is combined with MI-based therapy, motivational interviewing-based therapy, older adults actually do better than younger adults. And there's also acamprosate, which is also known as Campro, but there's no studies looking at the effectiveness in seniors. So harm reduction is the approach that I'm going to suggest for everyone here, and it works with individuals who are cognitively intact who want to change their drinking, but it is especially helpful for those individuals who are cognitively impaired and who aren't able to participate in the sort of psychotherapeutic approach. So harm reduction is just basically placing first priority on reducing the negative consequences of alcohol use rather than focusing on abstinence. And this is recognized as an effective approach to alcohol and other drug problems by the World Health Organization, and is actually Canada's drug strategy. So we're looking at eliminating immediate harms in the person's life and helping them work on realistic goals. And it also helps clinicians like ourselves with a way to look at establishing and maintaining a therapeutic relationship. So even though the person's not ready to cut down or quit, how might we make this person's environment safer for them despite their drinking? So it gives seniors something to do even when they feel it's impossible to quit or if they're too cognitively impaired. So we have 3 general areas that we can look at. So improving the older adults' mental and physical health, modifying their attitude and behavior, certainly about their self-confidence, about their ability to change their behavior, and improving the older adults' living environment. So the key to harm reduction is reduce those reasons that keep that person drinking. So there are lots of common harm reduction targets. So for our gentleman, he was depressed and not being treated, but at the same time, he denied depressive symptoms. So that's sort of a tough one. But if there is an underlying depression, let's tackle that. We don't have to change your drinking, but let's do something about your depression. If there are safety issues, the person lives at home and they're intoxicated all the time and they're using their stovetop, well, that's a safety issue. What can we put in place to make sure they're not burning their house down? Isolation, poor health, getting Meals on Wheels on board if they're not eating very well. Medication issues, so is there a potential for interactions with alcohol? And can we change some of those medications to make sure that they're not suffering from an alcohol-related interaction? Pain management is a big one. Some people do drink to minimize pain or distract themselves from pain, so can we address that? Finances and etc. And family, certainly. Family discord is also a big one. And here are some very basic strategies. So encourage the person to use lower alcohol alternatives or ask them to alternate alcoholic drinks with non-alcoholic drinks. Help them identify risky situations. So what situations lead to more craving and leads to you drinking, a bottle or 2 of wine a night. So I'm seeing a client right now in the community who identified the times from 4 to 6 as her high trigger moments. So we talked about, why don't you take an exercise class during that time? Why don't you go to the pool? Why don't you go for a walk in the opposite direction of the liquor store? These are very easy things of taking that temptation away. Encourage drinking less. 1 bottle of wine a day is better than 2. Encourage alternate drinking days. Just determine the sources of supply and help rebuild connections that they might be lacking. They need that social support. If they're going to make a change, they need support and encouragement. And certainly, we can do that for them, but it has to come from their social support network too, that they feel like they're really being encouraged and motivated to do something. Help, I think I just said that, and minimize identified triggers, and help with additional coping skills. So for Mr. C, he was going along with his contract, and he was very, very aware of how much he was allowed to drink. He was a little unsure about how it was actually being done. So he was allowed 1 to 2 beers a day, but he was under the impression that the long-term care facility dictated when he drank. He also really didn't like that they opened the beer for him at the nursing station. He wanted to open his beer, even though he had weakness in his hand. So we talked about, giving him lots of choice, which the home was already doing, but we wanted to reinforce that, and possibly providing a tool to help him open his own can, just to give him that sense of personal control. Putting in a reward system was important. So giving him positive reinforcement when he complies with a contract, and removing that positive reinforcement when he breaks the contract. So we're not talking about removing those 1 to 2 beers a day, because if you remove his only source of alcohol, that's going to drive his sneaking in alcohol even worse. And then you really don't know what's going on. So how do we reward him complying with the contract and giving him some sort of sense of personal control? The son suggested reducing his drinking limits after a visit with the daughter, because he said that basically any time that my dad is with my sister, he will have at least 2 beers. So maybe on those days you decrease what he's allowed. Possibly treating the depression. It was successful in the past, and maybe it might be successful in the present. He's not exactly very reliable in reporting depressive symptoms, so it might just be sort of a trial to see what happens. And with this individual, because he had scored 30 out of 30, the staff had assumed that he was perfectly capable of initiating his own activities. But looking at his MOCA score, he's not that cognitively savvy. I mean, he is in terms that he can hide beer in his toilet tank, but he can't, he's 17 out of 30, it's not good. So we might have to engage staff or recreation staff to get him, tell him what activity is being offered, and pull him along. Don't ask, just say, let's go. And the son was able to provide some additional ideas of what sort of activities he liked. So the conclusions, we know that senior alcohol-related problems occur. We know that it is a special considerations in terms of seniors because of life changes, but as well as biological changes. I hope you like and use the standardized screening tool, and anyone who wants to use the STAMI and wants me to actually explain a little bit better, I'm happy to do so. Brief interventions are great for at-risk drinkers. Motivational interviewing is great to help move people through the stages of change, especially those who are really resistant to change if they're cognitively intact. And harm reduction generally, all around, is the best approach if they're cognitively intact or not. And involve client, staff, family, and the environment.